You've done the technique correctly. You felt the wish fulfilled during SATs. You entered the state so vividly you could describe the room, the conversation, the weight of it being real. And for a moment, maybe longer, it worked. You saw movement. You got signs. The thing you assumed might have even appeared partially or fully before it dissolved again. And now you're stuck in the gap between the moment you assumed it and the moment it actually stays in your world. Most explanations will tell you the gap is about divine timing, or detachment, or that you need to let go harder, or feel it more intensely, or repeat the session for 30 days straight. I think they're all wrong. The gap isn't time, it's not the universe making you wait, it's location, psychological location. Here's what I mean. You built the state during your session. You occupied it fully for 20, maybe 30 minutes. Then you opened your eyes, checked your phone, talked to someone about yesterday's problem, and without even noticing it, you moved back into the old state. You visited the new one. You didn't dwell there. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly where that gap lives and how to close it. To understand what's actually happening during that gap, we need to go back to what Neville meant when he used the word assumption, because it's not what most teachers think it means. In 1952, Neville published The Power of Awareness. Chapter 24 draws a distinction that most people read straight past. He separates thinking of a thing from thinking from the thing. Most people imagine themselves looking at their desire. They picture the house from the outside. They see themselves receiving the check. They watch the conversation happen as if they're standing across the room. Neville said that's not assumption, that's observation. Assumption means you imagine from the end. You see the world through the eyes of the person who already has it. You're not watching yourself in the scene. You are the scene. This isn't a camera angle adjustment. Modern teachers will tell you it's about using first-person point of view in your visualization. That completely misses what Neville was saying. He wasn't giving you a framing technique. He was describing a fundamental shift in identity that persists after you open your eyes. The question isn't where you place the imaginal camera. The question is which self you're operating from when you're not imagining at all. And here's where it gets interesting, because what Neville taught in the late 40s and early 50s diverges completely from what his predecessors in the New Thought movement were teaching at the same time. Wallace Wattles taught students to hold the thought of wealth. Ernest Holmes taught mental atmosphere. Emmett Fox gave people the golden key method. All of them emphasized maintaining a mental picture or affirmative thought throughout the day. And on the surface, that sounds similar to what Neville taught. But it's not. New Thought asks you to control your thinking within your current identity. Neville asks you to abandon that identity entirely and occupy a new one. One is modification, the other is emigration. The difference matters because it explains exactly why your techniques work during practice but don't stick afterward. Now, before I show you what happens inside the gap itself, there is one specific behavior that signals you've already returned to the old state without realizing it. It's not what most people think it is. I'm going to show you exactly what that signal looks like in a moment, because if you can't catch it, you'll never know when the state has collapsed. Neville taught that you wear states the way you wear clothing. A state is not a mood. It's not a temporary feeling you visit during meditation. It's a fixed psychological address. Every state has a corresponding world. When you change states, you don't change the world, you change worlds. The old world still exists, but you no longer occupy it. Most people try to modify their current world instead of migrating to a different one. And that's the first place the gap opens. Here's a pattern I've watched repeat with student after student. Someone learns SATs, they do it correctly. They enter the state of the wish fulfilled so vividly they can feel the texture of the scene. They do this every night for 2 weeks. And something shifts. A door opens, a person reaches out, money appears. They see confirmation that the assumption is hardening. Then, 3 days later, it evaporates, the door closes, the person goes silent, the money gets pulled back, and they have no idea what happened. What happened is they visited the new state during their 20-minute session, then returned to dwelling in the old state the rest of the day. They checked their bank account from the old assumption. They scrolled social media in the old identity. They talked about their problems from the position of someone who still has those problems. It wasn't sabotage. It was simply living in the wrong psychological address most of the day and wondering why the 1 hour didn't override it. Neville said this explicitly in his lectures from 1953. An assumption, though false to the outer world, if persisted in, will harden into fact. The key word is persisted. He warned that most people make an assumption during prayer or technique, then unconsciously return to their former assumption the moment they encounter contradictory evidence. The assumption doesn't fail. The practitioner vacates it prematurely. If you've been doing SATs for months and seeing inconsistent results, the problem isn't your technique execution. The problem is you're only assuming for 20 minutes a day. Consciousness doesn't average your assumptions, it expresses your dominant dwelling place. If you assume the wish fulfilled for 1 hour and assume lack for 23 hours, the 23 hours win, not because the universe is punishing you, because you're occupying the state of lack as your primary residence. Here's the signal I mentioned earlier. The moment you open your eyes after practice and the first thought you have is checking whether the thing has happened yet, you've returned to the old state. That checking impulse is the tell. The new state doesn't check, it already knows. If you're looking for evidence, you're operating from the assumption that it's not yet done. That's the old address. Let me show you what this looks like in practice using one of Neville's own examples. In 1943, Neville was drafted into the United States Army at age 38. He was stationed at Camp Polk in Louisiana during the war. He wanted an honorable discharge so he could return to his apartment in New York. Every night in the barracks, he didn't visualize receiving discharge papers. He didn't imagine the commanding officer handing him a document. He slept assuming he was already back in his bed in New York, not hoping to be there, not wishing to be there, occupying that end state as if it were already fact. The assumption wasn't I hope to be discharged. It was I am in my bed in New York. That's dwelling, not visiting. He didn't toggle between soldier in Louisiana during the day and civilian in New York at night. He occupied the end state so completely that after 9 days the Army granted him an honorable discharge under Regulation 615-360, paragraph 5. The gap closed because he never returned to the former assumption. Now here's the part most people miss when they hear this story. There's a particular action Neville took during those 9 days that kept the state intact even when contradictory evidence appeared. It's not something he mentions in the retelling, but it's implicit in how he describes his practice. I'll tell you what that action was in just a moment, because without it the example collapses under the weight of daily contradiction. Now here's the practical problem. You can build the state during technique time. Sets, visualization, scripting, whatever method you prefer, but you have no system for maintaining it across the rest of the day. The old state reasserts itself automatically through habits, conversations, environmental triggers, social media, contradictory evidence. This isn't a willpower problem, it's an architectural problem. You need a protocol for your unmanaged hours, not just better technique for the 1 hour. If you want to go deeper on this, I've put together a short diagnostic in the description. It's free, takes about 4 minutes. It walks through the specific moments most people unconsciously return to the old state and shows you exactly where your assumption is breaking down between practice sessions. So the question becomes, how do you actually do this when you're not lying in an army barracks with nothing but time? Here's exactly what to do tonight. First, after your session, before you pick up your phone or talk to anyone, notice the very first assumption you return to. Not the thought, the assumption underneath the thought. Are you checking to see if the thing happened yet? That's the old state. The new state doesn't check, it already knows. Second, when you encounter contradictory evidence during the day, something that directly conflicts with your assumption, catch yourself before you react from the old identity. You don't need to suppress the reaction, you need to revise it immediately. This is the action Neville took during those 9 days at Camp Polk. He revised every piece of contradictory evidence the moment it appeared. Roll call in the morning, orders from his commanding officer, conversations with other soldiers who were stuck there for the duration of the war. He didn't let those events stand as fact. He rewrote them from the assumption that he was already home in New York before sleep that night. Most people treat revision as an optional advanced technique you learn after you master sets. That's backwards. Neville didn't teach it that way. Revision isn't advanced, it's the maintenance protocol for assumption. Every time the day hands you evidence of the old state, you rewrite it from the new state before you go to sleep that night. Skip this step and you're rebuilding the old world faster than you're constructing the new one. Third, track your dominant psychological residence for one full day. Not what you think during your session, where you actually live between sessions. The gap you're trying to close is the distance between those two addresses. Nothing here requires talent. It requires attention to the hours you have been ignoring. You can do exactly what I'm describing. The mechanism is universal. The only variable is whether you're willing to manage the part of the day you've been leaving unmanaged. Remember when I mentioned that consciousness expresses your dominant dwelling place? This is where that becomes practical. Most training focuses on the hour you spend in active practice, refining your SATs, perfecting your scene, intensifying the feeling. But if the state you construct in that hour dissolves across your waking day, you're not building toward manifestation, you're oscillating between two worlds. Actually, let me rephrase that. You're not oscillating. You're living in the old world and visiting the new one for 20 minutes before bed. The gap between assuming and receiving is really the gap between state construction and state maintenance. Closing it requires more than better visualization. It requires tracking what happens to your assumption when you're not actively managing it. The full protocol for maintaining state across your waking day, what I call state architecture, is what the source code diagnostic walks you through. It's free, linked in the description. Takes about 4 minutes. It'll show you exactly where your state is collapsing between practice sessions and give you a personalized starting point for closing that gap. Here's what I want you to take from this. The gap isn't mystical. It's not the universe testing your divine timing or energetic resistance. It's the measurable distance between where you practice living and where you actually live. You built the state during your session, you felt it, you occupied it fully. Then you opened your eyes and moved back into the old one without even noticing. The gap exists because you keep returning to a psychological address you thought you'd left. Neville gave you the principle. Now you need the protocol for staying in the state, not just the technique that builds it. Seeing this is the easy half. You can already feel which of those hours is yours. The hard part is installing a state that holds across all 23 hours when you're not actively managing it. That's the work almost no one walks you through. Because a diagnosis is easy to give away and a protocol is not. You now know what's breaking. You know the old state reasserts itself between sessions. You know consciousness expresses your dominant dwelling place, not your peak moments. But knowing the mechanism and having a system to maintain state across a full waking day are two different things. So there's a specific next step for the people who want to actually close it. If you want the state you're building during practice to survive the rest of your day, the source code diagnostic walks you through exactly where your assumption is collapsing and what to do about it. It's personalized to the specific hours where you're unconsciously returning to the old state. It's free. Link in the description. Takes about 4 minutes. It'll show you the gap and give you a starting point for closing it. Tonight, after your session, before you do anything else, catch the first assumption you return to. That's your data point. That's where the gap lives. Neville taught, the world is yourself pushed out. Ask yourself what you are conscious of being, and you will know what world you occupy. You've been occupying two worlds. One during practice, one between sessions. Close the distance and the gap closes with it.